all the roads are winding.
Welcome to the show, Louise. I'm so thrilled to have you back. I love hanging out with you, and it's great to talk with you again. Hi.
Hey, I love being back. Thank you.
Sure. And today we also have Shauna with us. Hi, Shauna.
Hello.
And if you are new to the podcast, Shauna is our co-founder, and this is very special. So I'm excited to have us just make some magic today. So before we get into it, Louise, would you like to set the space?
Yeah. Just want to lead everybody listening and us three in just a little somatic relational meditation. So noticing how our minds right now are relating to our bodies and doing so through sensation. So first thing, just kind of feel what's holding your body. We start there. Whether it's the ground or a chair, the earth, the floor, a bed, just kind of notice the surfaces that are holding you. And see if your body, where it's being held, can soften into those a little more. Not resist their support, but actually really just kind of give into them. And as we give into that support, notice how the body responds to it, especially the parts that aren't being directly supported. So if your arms are hanging or your head is sitting up, noticing how those areas feel when the rest of you gives into where you're being supported. And as we're feeling this, we're really just scanning and we're just looking for three sensations. We're looking for constriction, which we can also think of as stress or pressure. We're looking for expansion, which we can think of as peace or calm, softness maybe. And we're looking for numbness. Where don't I feel? And we're just letting our mind scan our body and noticing these three states where, if they are in our bodies. And we don't have to do anything about them. We don't have to figure them out. We're just noticing where they are. And with the eyes slowly opening, if they're closed, looking down at your legs and your torso and your feet and your hands and kind of visually taking in your body. Like remembering that you're the witness, you, that conscious you, the consciousness is witnessing this body. And noticing what it's like as you witness it, what comes up in your mind, what comes up in your body. What parts do you like? What parts do you judge? Just kind of noticing the relationship between you and your body. And then really slowly taking in your room. Like slowly looking around yourself, especially your shoulders, looking behind one shoulder slowly and taking in the whole space. And as you take in the space, lingering on any objects or plants or photographs or anything that is really enjoyable. And as you linger on that object, feeling what part of your body enjoys it. This is also a really simple exercise of co-regulating with your environment. What parts of my environment do I relate to, and what parts of me relate to the environment? Just like we were doing with our physical bodies. And again, we're just noticing. And for some of us, this can be activating. We can feel a lot of charge and discomfort. If that's the case, you can pause before we speak more and just be with that and stretch and use a pillow and tone and let out sensations of sound. Or just notice how it feels to be in this moment. And a final kind of clarifying question is just noticing, am I here right now? Or am I somewhere else? Is my mind taking me somewhere else? And if it is taking me somewhere else, how do I know, where is it in my mind that I'm going to? And how does my body react to going somewhere else? Just like calling in the corners, we're essentially calling in our bodies. We're bringing them to this space, and we're noticing how they relate to this space. And as simple as this is, so much information can be unveiled if you really sit in that feeling. And just kind of come into yourself when you're ready. sometimes it feels good to give yourself a hug and really squeeze your arms together. There are times you want to expand out and stretch, almost like you're flying or swimming, and just notice what feels better. And even if you're activated or numb or feeling really regulated and comfy, you're at least more aware of your body right now. You're in relationship with how it is in this moment. I think it's a good place to start from.
Thanks, Louise. I noticed myself yawning a bunch, which is a sign of nervous system shifting, right?
Yeah, that's the parasympathetic response. Whenever I do a course and we're doing like exercises and I see a bunch of people yawning, I always say that's awesome. Don't feel like it's being polite. Like really indulge the yawn.
Let it out. Let it in. Yeah. Cool.
That was nice. I always feel like I yawn a lot in like moments like that too. And I was feeling constriction in my like sacral that I didn't realize was there. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. I know when I ask that question about where are you? Like, is your mind taking you somewhere else? When I ask the question, then my mind takes me somewhere else. And I always notice immediately there's constriction in my chest when I'm going somewhere else. And then I come back here and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm here.
Cool. So before we get into anything else, I'd love to know, who are your ancestors? What are your lineages?
Yeah, I was telling you that I've been diving so much more into my ancestry and actually speaking to my living relatives that are my elders, which has been really fun. And I'm learning more and more. So in short, there's kind of 4 main lands that my body grows from, if you will. There's the Baden-Württemberg area in Germany that was inhabited originally by the Swabians or the Swabians. Then there's the Irish relatives, and they're in Cork, County Cork. And then there's the Puerto Rican Tainos, and then there's the North African Berbers. And it's interesting because my Berber relatives moved to the Canary Islands, which were conquered by Spain. So we were always thought to be Spanish because of that, land being renamed. And so I found out through my grandfather and his side that his matrilineal heritage or lineage comes from the Canary Islands via North Africa. So it was like a whole other glimpse at my ancestors, which made a lot of sense based on some kind of intuitive ways that I was styling my face even, and turbans I would wear and things I would do that made no sense of my culture. It started making more sense, and it's pretty beautiful.
That's cool. That's cool. And where are you now? Where are you located? And who are the original people of the land you're on?
Yeah, I live in Woodstock, New York, in upstate New York, the original territory of the Esopus people, also the Lenape tribe.
So super stoked to talk with you today. And I like to listen in the mornings for what's coming through, because that often is an indicator of where the conversation might want to go. And today, it's wholly appropriate that my inspiration came through music. So I want to just start with this and see what comes up for you. There's this song called The Truth by Handsome Boy Modeling School. And there's this line in it that says, "The truth hurts just as much as fucking with lies will." And when I heard that, I was like, Luis, what does this bring up? What do you hear? What do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I think of the truth hurting, I hear the word capacity. And so much of the work that I do somatically as a somatic therapist is about building capacity and identifying capacity. What is my capacity? And these trauma responses, and when I get triggered and when I react onto somebody, that's a reflection of my capacity. So when we think about the truth hurts, if we've lived our lives in an unconscious way where we don't know our true feelings and we haven't actually gotten in touch with our authentic desires because we're fawning or we're freezing or we're dissociating all the time, our truth has a lot of charge connected to it. That's why being seen is so intensely scary when you're being seen for your truth. Like, how many times will you, maybe even you two have experienced this in interviews or watching interviews, where someone says something really powerful and they laugh really loud afterwards. And it doesn't mean their capacity is low. It just means there's a lot of charge that comes from powerful truth, right? So I find that when people first start accessing their truth, it's extremely overwhelming and threatening because they haven't built the capacity to actually walk in truth.
Thanks. Tell us more about that capacity.
Gosh, I have so much. So if we think of the body and we think of it in these, I'll be more binary with it, like either constricted or expanded. We think of it in these two ways. The body is in a constant state of constriction and expansion, constantly. If we think of our hearts, that's how we live, right? It constantly constricts and constantly expands. Our lungs constantly constrict and expand. Our eyes, our muscles to move our bones and our arms. So it's a physical being, just like anywhere in nature when you look, that's always having an expansion and constriction. So there's flow. That's how flow is created, essentially. So when there's trauma is the biological experience of overwhelming amounts of charge flooding the body in response to threat, real or perceived, doesn't matter. And when that charge floods the body naturally constricts because it's actually getting ready to propel, right? But when we're traumatized, we never propel. We tend to freeze around the propellant, go into freeze response or fawn response or the beginning of fight or flight, but we never complete it. So we're kind of living in that trauma response and developing in it, growing in it, which means we're developing in a physiology of constriction, because constriction starts to say that the body essentially says constriction is what protects me. And a traumatized state is one that assumes threat, expects threat. So the physiology, the actual biology, not just our mindsets, those as well, but the biology is constricted. And if we all visualize a sponge that we're like constricting and we see all the water coming out of it, it loses its capacity. It can't hold water. So the water comes out. That's how we get the water out of the sponge. Same thing with our bodies. When we're constricted, we literally lose the space in our fascia and our tissues and our lungs and our organs even to let charge move through. And because everything on this planet has a charge attached to it, every emotion, every experience, everything on this planet then becomes overwhelming if we have very little capacity, joy and pain. So capacity comes from the expanded state, a physiological state, and an expanded mind. And if you have trauma, you've developed in the opposite, the constricted state and the constricted mind. So that's essentially what that means in the scope we're speaking about.
I love that sponge metaphor. Thanks, really did it for me. So yeah, that's cool. And then if you're traumatized, if you have trauma, then everything is going to have charge. It's going to be intense. You're not going to have the capacity for it. Something that you've been working with lately is around like how the body responds to vibration. So tell us how vibration relates to this charge. I kind of want to unpack charge and what's happening here.
Do you want to unpack charge first?
Yeah, charge, vibration. Just take us there. I know you see the vision. I don't know what it is.
You're my lovely container. Yeah, so charge is, so let's think of what charge means physically. So think right now, and everyone following can do this. Think about something that stresses you out. And you'll feel the charge. You'll feel a rush to your chest. You'll feel some part of you getting tight. You'll feel your heartbeat. You'll feel pressure. Why don't you two tell me where you feel your charge?
I just happened to have like some congestion in my nose today, and it just like intensified.
For me, I felt it in my chest space, and I could just imagine this little like burst, like of energy, like, oof.
That's right. So you both feel this physiological event, and anyone following is going to feel it as well. Now, that charge biologically is adrenaline, and electricity. That's essentially what's happening. So there's an electrical circuit that runs through the vagus nerve, which is a huge nerve that connects your brain to all your organs. It wraps around every part of your body. There's an electrical charge that runs through that nervous system. And there's a shot of adrenaline that goes into your blood, which is what causes this extra stimulation, which causes the heart rate to increase, the vision to increase and get more detailed, the labored breathing, shoulders pulling up, any kind of constriction we experience. So the charge is energy. I mean, it's the simplest way to put it. It's a huge boost of energy to propel your body away from a threat. It's an extremely kind gift that we're given as beings, because when something comes at us, we don't decide to run. That charge decides to push us. And that's what's very magical about the charge. This is where it goes way beyond psychology and the somatic world. Somatic psychology kind of starts blurring the line between the mystery and what we know. And the mystery is the charge. Where does this life force come from? It's a life force. So the charge enters the body, let's say, from an event again. And every time we have stress, or we almost hit an animal when we're driving, we stop really fast, or we see someone we're trying to avoid, or we remember something, we hear something on the news, we get triggered. Getting triggered is another way to say, oh, I got in touch with the charge. It's always there, but now it's coming up to me. So there's this charge, which is energy. What's important about the relationship between the charge and vibration is vibration moves charge. So if you think of like vibration in water, you see the beautiful ripples it creates. Like the Jurassic Park is an idea coming to my mind right now. And there's that lovely ring in the puddle, right? That's what's happening in our bodies. So I'll give a great example. We can try this together. There's a sound we use in somatic therapy called VOO. And it's a sound that you use when there's constriction, usually in the gut or throat that you can't reach. So if everyone tries this with me, you take a really deep breath and you say the sound VOO as low as you can until you run out of air. So I'll do it. We can all do this. Deep breath in. And you go VOO. And then just notice what your body's doing. And everyone who followed along listening, notice your body might activate, you might sweat, it might
feel
relieve.
warm.
Yeah, it might get warm, it might bring relief. It's going to do something. And when you're in actual session, there's context to it, like you're using it like medicine. We just kind of did it as an exercise. But it shows us the power of vibration. Vibration activates and moves charge.
Cool.
I'm going to pause there.
I have a question that came up.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the difference between feeling triggered and feeling activated, and if there's even a difference?
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot of people say, oh, I feel triggered, and I'm wondering if that's what they actually mean.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Essentially, there's no difference except for oftentimes triggered also has meaning attached to it. So like if you trigger me, it means you remind my body of a past experience. So if let's say you talked over me and I felt triggered. So let's say my feeling triggered is like, I'm angry. She won't let me speak, right? Where does she won't let me speak live in my past? Like what's the lineage of that experience if she won't let me speak? When I ask people this, you go down this amazing journey of all the times you experience someone not letting you speak. And when you get back far enough, you find moments that have threat attached to them. It could be in school. It could be with your mother if she never listened to you. I mean, there's so many places it can take you. And so that early experience happens of not being able to speak, coupled with threat. And remember, threat equals charge. So my body has a little stored charge, let's say, in my chest. And the label on that charge is she won't let me speak. Right? Or no one cares what I think. There's some unconscious meaning attached to that sensation. So when someone I'm with brings up that sensational experience again, like a dynamic that's replayed, the label, the meaning of I'm not allowed to speak also comes up. Now, a lot of time that's unconscious. We don't actually know the lineage of that. We just feel like we actually believe in that moment, you're not letting me speak. But when we go into it, we notice, oh, it reminded me of all the times, ... So a trigger is a state of activation. You're 100% right. And it's often associated with some kind of meaning from past experiences.
Thank you.
Okay, I love that. Let's get into vibration. So this, we had this example of how the vibration helped move that energy of that activation. Take us further.
Yeah. So maybe, do you want to hear like my personal story around this?
Of course.
Okay. Of course. Good. So see, that's me laughing about my truth right there. So I think what's interesting is, so I think of 15. I was 15. And this was the moment that my life changed, truly. And I've only been able to put it into words recently because I've finally understood what happened. It was very mysterious, and it still is, but I have a little more understanding of it. I was 15. I had watched this Joni Mitchell documentary that somebody bought me for, I think, Christmas solstice. It was Christmas at the time. And I was watching it, and I felt like so inspired to write music afterwards, but I never wrote or sang or anything. And I had this guitar hanging up in my bedroom, and it was just for beauty. I didn't know how to play it. And I pulled it down, and I started strumming it. And the vibration, like if you ever held a guitar and you strum it, you feel it against your core, right? And my core at the time was so ravaged with trauma. I mean, anyone can listen to my previous episode with you, but just to bring that in for anyone new, I was born intersex. So I developed breasts and hips. And when I was in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, I was sexually assaulted, and I was bullied, and I had so many cases of violence against that part of my body, So that whole torso area, my hips, my breasts, that whole area was like off limits. So from 5th grade on, after these things happened, I started hiding that area with duct tape, with vests, with sweaters, layers. I was like hiding that part of myself because if no one saw that, I could pass. I just looked like a boy. But if someone saw that, they knew there was something ambiguous and strange about me. And at the time, there was no label of intersex or androgyny or gender fluidity. I mean, that was not an option in my culture growing up. So I was like a real threat to the, I guess, rules, So there I am, 5 years, 6 years into that trauma, dissociating completely from my neck to my waist. And there's an instrument, there's a being against that part of my body where I felt trauma, where I experienced aggression and violence. And I'm playing these chords, these notes, and it's vibrating right into that area. And when I look back now and I feel it, even right now, I can notice that's when things started to heal because I was unconsciously, somatically healing this stored charge that had been stuck there for 6 years, right? And I didn't know that. And as I'm playing, I'm singing, these sounds are coming out of me. And so there's this movement that never got to come out. The repressed scream, during moments of violence, the sobbing that was repressed, the leave me alone, get away, all the things that we don't say when we're dealing with physical abuse was coming out just through vibration and song. And so when I go back to it, I feel emotional because it was so opening. And it was the first moment since, my assault that my body got to actually experience another being touching it in a safe space. And so there was this uncoupling that happened, which was, oh, this area can be seen and you're safe. Now, it took me 15 years to get that, but the healing began then, right?
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love how you didn't have to get into your story or anything. The vibration just went right to it. Would you say that whole area had been numb?
100%, 100%, completely numb. I mean, I don't even think I had a body for those 5 or 6 years. I don't remember. I have few memories of tolerating myself in front of a mirror, maybe. But I really just hid myself even from myself. So it was like that part of my body did not exist until that moment, right? And like you said, I didn't have to go into story because it was somatic and it was unconscious. It wasn't fully integrated until recently. But it set up a wisdom in my body of somatic healing. So when I did find somatic healing, it just clicked because I had been doing it for a decade without knowing.
Wow. Wow. I love I'm just imagining like what's happening. Can you take us into how that's evolved to what you're doing today? Like with music, with sound, with healing?
Yeah, that it's interesting. So there's two parts to that. There's just I come to this work from that experience, first of all. So the way I hold space for people isn't like the orthodox way that a somatic therapist holds space. Because to me, it's actually more through like an indigenous pagan spiritual lens of everything's our relative, right? And that's what I started learning through this experience. And this will kind of segue into the music piece. That opening meditation I took us through, that's like a check-in of how do I relate to myself? How does my mind relate to my body? How does my body relate to the room? What that really does as a practice when we practice it is it shows us, and this is what Sean and I were talking about, how our minds colonize our bodies based on a colonized culture. And I have to always name the people that really like led me through to this work. Dr. Amber McZeal, who, oh my goodness, you'd have to have her on sometime. She's brilliant woman. She's in Seattle, I believe, or somewhere in the Northwest, but she really taught me so much. And my friend Corrine Bell. So both are women of color. Corrine is biracial, and I met Corrine while I was studying somatic work, and we were kindred spirits. We kind of fell in love as friends. And she started this very special study group about over a year ago with Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands. And the study group is essentially a dive into what's called somatic abolitionism, which is our minds might not be racist. In this case, it's like through the lens of racism. So our minds may not be racist, but where do we carry it in our bodies? From what we see on the news growing up, from our intergenerational trauma of our lineage, from our ancestors, where does our bodies flinch against the other? And you're put into three groups so people feel safe to express without triggering each other. And being multi-ethnic, I'm in the Bodies of Culture group. And I met Amber through that because she did a group healing for us. And Amber and I have had these conversations because she does work called Decolonizing the Psyche. It's her dissertation, and it's kind of like her life's work. It's what she leads and teaches. And through these interviews and phone calls and talks, I started noticing the difference between colonized and decolonized. And colonized essentially being having power over something or dominating something, and decolonized being in relationship with something. And when I think of my trauma, like my particular trauma, which it's so specific and unique because of the gender, ambiguity and such. But at the end of the day, it's not too different in terms of how it's held from everyone else's stories of growing up and how they relate to their bodies. Because from the trauma, I started seeing my body as an issue. And I started seeing my body as something to hate because it wasn't doing what I wanted. And I started noticing I'm colonizing my body. These wild, authentic landscapes that are blooming the way they want to in their own avant-garde, unique way are being tilled in these very specific monocrops, if you will, by my mind. You should look like this. You should do this. You should give me this. And I did that for many, 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 many years, as we tend to, until this moment of the music occurred. And then, 5 or 6 years into that, I started writing an album when I lived in the city. This was, I think, 2010. And I was writing the album because I finally, in my mind, heard the term colonize. I didn't ever hear it before. or if I did, I didn't notice. And I finally heard it, and I still didn't understand the connection, but I could feel it somewhere. And all these songs started spilling out of me on the guitar, which is the first time I picked up guitar since that experience of moving it through my body. I was a pianist after that. And when I was playing these guitar songs, these songs literally from the land started coming out. Songs about the mountains, songs about the river, songs about the West Village, like the land I was living on and the land that I was being called to upstate, were coming through these songs. And the vibration of them and singing them and recording them and listening to them, they became my masters. And they literally drew me and my wife out of Brooklyn and into Woodstock. And we can go into this. I mean, I'm saying so much right now, but there was, when I look back on the process, which I did last year, when everything in our society erupted, politically and racially and economically, everything in the pandemic, so much erupted. And these songs, after 12 years, came back to me like they were demos that I was never going to release. And I noticed the language of them and the intention of them and everything they were offering was exactly what we were going through as a community. I thought, this is so strange. And I showed them to my friend who's an engineer. He said, you have to let me produce this. These songs have to be released. And so he produced them. And so now I'm at this place where I'm realizing, I can use these songs and this process to teach people through their own bodies how to decolonize themselves and then be in better relation to those around them, including the indigenous people they share land with, as well as their own bodies and their own land they live on.
I just think that's beautiful. And I love how like nature was relating with you through you in the form of music. That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love that you reflected that back, because it's only been in the last 4 years that I've really understood how much the body truly is the earth. We think that the body comes from the earth, we think of that, we think from dust to dust, all these things. But in that whole area between birth and death, we are a living earth, and it is speaking through us and to us. And to really get that, it has been profound for me.
The other thing that came up was the concept of time and how when you produced them, there was no agenda. It was just something that it just came through you. But then it came full cycle and it was the time is now, just letting that process come in a natural way and having no rush, to get it out. I love that.
I think that's my favorite part about this too, is how authentic it is. I've made many records and there's always a deadline, or you have to promote it a certain way, or you have to go on tour and play it. And this was something that I really made for me. I wouldn't even say I made it. It's it came through for me. And I felt satisfied in it. When I moved, it felt okay, it's over. It served its purpose. And I didn't know it was going to be this kind of dormant seed, waiting to come out at the right time to be fertilized. So yeah, I appreciate that you see that.
I think music is so therapeutic, and it's nice that, it was a form of therapy for you, but also just how potent. I think music in general, the vibration of it is amplifying. And so when people hear your music and what comes up for them, and then what from that they're allowed to process in their own life, and the healing journey that it takes them on is also very powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're saying that. I'm noticing, how many people, when they work with me or, another therapist, or when I've worked with healers, therapists, one thing that's so soothing about a person is their voice, right? When you hear a voice, you just feel when we listen to podcasts, it's like I'm co-regulating with you through your podcast, and you don't even know it, just because I'm hearing those vibrations of your voice and your tone are doing something in my nervous system. So it takes us back to that original piece here about vibration and charge. And what's so interesting is my music and my healing work has always been separate. I never knew how to combine them, because music for me was always so selfish. It was mine. And it was my little world. And it's where I went, through all my years of abuse and trauma to find safety and write about it. It was a secret for like a decade. And so it never made sense to use it, outside of that purpose. And then this record, because I've already been with the songs for so long, they just feel like they're part of my history. They don't feel like they're mine anymore. Like they don't feel like they're mine to work with. It feels like they're for other people to work with. And so they inspired this beautiful ritual that I'm going to do in October. And I'm going to do some parts of it with, your community when we have our beautiful group healing together as well. But it essentially helping people experience in their bodies what I experienced in that time of writing the work and listening to the work and then moving. Like, how is your body, your ancestors, your earth, how is it actually speaking through you? What does it sound like? What parts of your lineage are coming forward through your body now? Like, how are the ancestors moving you unconsciously? How much trauma is part of it? How much wisdom is part of it? And kind of like using that information to really be, I guess, just beautifully experiencing this life with that kind of wisdom.
What would you say to people who are listening and maybe feeling like they've tried music and they just didn't do it, or they're not good enough, or, maybe it doesn't come as naturally? Like, what would you say to all those judgments that come through in the process of creating?
Such a good question, because when I experienced that extremely profound healing, I knew zero. I didn't know how to sing. I didn't know anything about a guitar. I wasn't even playing chords. I was just strumming the strings, and it was just the vibration of it. So I would say to those people, they're always making music, they don't know it. Like, their foot hitting the ground is music. Their heartbeat is music. When they cough, it's music. When they're talking, their tone, it's all music. And I learned so much through someone when I'm working with someone based on their speaking. Because when someone is like, I used to speak like this, right? Just really withheld. You can like feel the repression. Like, that's what we do when that vibration is too intimate and it's unconscious. We don't even know we're doing it, but we're lacking that song within us as we speak. And then as I got to speak more and I started singing more, my voice started loosening and I could talk more like this and go into more emotional realms and kind of really express myself with different tonalities. So it's really about knowing that you're always making it. And the question is, it's not about, like, I like the question so much because it's not about making a song. Like, that happens by accident. It's not about being a songwriter. It's about being someone in relationship with the feelings that sound bring into their bodies. It's a relationship to sound, which is just vibration again, right? That's what it really is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, there's decolonizing the mind, but then it's like, okay, decolonizing your creative expression and relationship and sound and play, and like, stepping out of all of this need for it to fit into any freaking box of a C chord or of a song structure or anything, and just be in the direct experience of it. I think this is something that I'm like, people, this is possible. You don't like, this is like, if I could shake people and be like, look, like this, like, you don't have to make the C chord, or, but in whatever we do over here with intuition and, earth connection. So yeah, I love that.
You're absolutely right. I think that's actually one of the, like, when you were saying about decolonizing the mind, and my friend will call it decolonizing the psyche as well. It's also about decolonizing the body, and vibration is felt through the body. The truth of it is the body is always decolonized. The mind is always trying to put it back in its place, right? So our bodies know all this already, and we know that. Even our perspiring, we oppress. It's like, it's like as we as we fall in love with our bodies, the way we fall in love with like a meadow, we start to notice like, oh, my pubic hair, right? Like, those are beautiful bushes. We notice like, oh, the perspiration, that's like the creek running through the field. It's all supposed to be here. And I'm not saying people aren't allowed to shave their pubic hair. I'm just saying it's like we're supposed to, it's learning how to see your body in its natural element without the oppressive judgment. You might have fun with it, you might play with it and do things with it. I'm someone that had plastic surgery. I had top surgery. It's like, I'm not against, playing with your body. My intentions when I had it were different than they would have been now. My intentions were to throw a part of me away. And when I went into the office of the somatic therapist, like 7 years after that surgery, it was the first time I felt my chest, even after having surgery and having a male presenting body, right? And so by talking out loud about having breasts was more healing than actually getting rid of them, even after I didn't have them anymore. So I hope that makes sense.
You gonna get them put back in?
You know what? It's funny, when my daughter was born, intersex men are known, if they get rid of their breast, they can grow back when there's a child because like of the hormonal shifts. I was just like, if they grow back, I'm not getting rid of them this time, but they didn't. But they could at any point, so I'm like open to it.
That's awesome. Wow, that's so unique. Yeah.
Your story is not one that we get to hear a lot, and so just being here and witnessing, and it's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I want to hear what you have to say about, connecting in. You've talked about the body as the earth, and I love how you've likened, our pubic hairs and our perspiration to meadows and streams, and now we've talked about vibration, and I can kind of like nebulously see how the dots are connected, but I want to. Could you take us further into like, okay, the connection between vibration and like really embodying and be like the experience of being the earth instead of just intellectually knowing it?
I love that question. There's just so many ideas coming, so I'm trying to sit with it and see what the best way to explain that. The best way to explain it would be my own experience, because there's not one experience of that, or one way, right? I think what's really interesting, what I've been playing with a lot, is the term attunement, right? And so when we think of attunement, that's one of the most magical things of being a human, is we are constantly attuning to things around us, unknowingly, but constantly. So when someone says like, I'm an empath, that's someone who is constantly attuning, usually to stress and sadness and suffering. Because most of the time, the empath isn't running around saying like, oh my God, I feel so much joy. They're not like, oh my God, I can't handle the joy. They're usually saying, I'm suffering. I feel like one's pain. I feel sickness. Their bodies are attuned to stress and pain. And that's why I call empath, that expression of empath, trauma response. And sometimes people get upset with that because they really identify with being an empath in a way that's magical. And I don't see it any less magical, actually, that is the trauma response. Because to me, trauma is magical, this thing that comes into our bodies to save us. But if my empathy is only oriented toward threat, that's a trauma empathy. That's a traumatic form of empathy. When my empathy is attuned to joy and threat, this is where we go back to capacity. I have the capacity from all my joy attunement to hold space for the threat that I see and experience as well, versus no capacity from only attuning to threat and pain. And this is like a precursor to your question. So if I'm walking through the woods, right, am I attuning, just like the early exercise, am I attuning to the steps? Do I feel the air on my skin? Do I smell the breath of the land? Do I see the bark of the tree? Like, what am I attuning to? Sometimes we have our headphones in. Sometimes we're having conversations. Sometimes we're in thought. That's what we're attuning to. And that's fine. But when we attune to how our bodies, not our minds, are experiencing the land, it's very psychedelic because we start to become the land. I know you two know this, and I know your listeners know this, because I read your emails. And so there's a serious magic always happening in the body, with the body always being attuned to earth. And one way is like Like if any of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass, like Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, there's those chapters about the color, the violet color against the yellow, and how something that's simple, like one of many examples of how nature creates some kind of display of sensation to lure the body. Now that's a body-earth relationship, and that's always happening. And I use squash, but I especially use watermelon because it's the best example. Watermelon and strawberries and tomato, we could say. Any fruit that's red is loaded with something called lycopene. And lycopene is a really powerful antioxidant that protects you from sunburn. So why would the earth wait until the sun is high to give us these fruits, right? There's this immediate relationship to the beings, the bodily beings on the land of, I'm bringing this fruit out, this body needs it, something in this body knows it eats it, then it propagates more of me. And it's that kind of like ongoing reciprocity where this piece of earth, this plant, meets my needs and helps me survive another day so that I can spread its seed and it can survive another day. And in that is the amazing, intimate, relational experience of body and earth that's always happening. But the mind isn't always noticing. So it's always about, can we attune to how my body is already connected to earth? It amazes me when I think of like childbirth, how a mother can nurture a child for 1 to 2 years with nothing but milk if they choose to, right? That's huge. That's huge. I mean, really, they do like 8 months and they feed, but I've met some really hardcore people that are like, I'm going to do milk as long as I can. And it's amazing that the body of the mother, the breast, the milk, which comes from her blood, so her blood turns it into milk, or their blood turns it into milk. And that milk gives the baby everything it needs, right? It's amazing that the earth literally feeds our body everything we need. And that simple awareness of what's on my plate is actually my medicine, and this piece of relative, which is earth, feeding me. It lets when our mind connect to that, just our food that we're eating, that's an act of reciprocity. So it's kind of always happening. This wooden desk I'm talking to you with, it's always there, but it's how much are we attuned to it?
Love it. Love it. Love that lycopene story too. Love a good lycopene story.
Cool? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Damn, I've been wanting some cherries. I've been wanting watermelon.
Oh, yeah.
I was just thinking of like all the foods my body has been craving, and now I'm like, okay, why?
Yes. Yeah, so that's a perfect example actually of you attuning to your relationship between body and earth, and body being earth, because you're noticing my body knows where in the earth and what in the earth it needs because they're the same. The body isn't connected into the ground. That's why we're not plants, but we're the same. We still get our nourishment from the same place. So it's like this 1 degree removal, but the body still has this communication, which is very interesting because it's even thought that there's these plant hormones in the air that are always communicating with people and plants. And we know with pheromones, with smells, that's true. So there's always like a chemical relationship even from plant to person, even just through the air, via color, memory of taste. And suddenly I'm craving cherries and it's hot out. I mean, it's amazing. It's so amazing to me.
That is amazing. I think what's coming forward for me is how easily our minds take us out of this magic and just have us believe that we're disconnected and isolated, and that we have to follow some rigid external authority or structure or diet or whatever. And like, there's so much wisdom within. And in that, it's a journey, because so much of that inner wisdom and that ability to recognize and navigate it has been distorted through trauma and, generations of trauma. But that there's a way back. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, it's just profound what you said, because it's what you said is essentially, again, the process of colonization. It starts in the mind. And if I meditate on, Chris Columbus or any of the colonizers we come to think of when we think of colonization in that way, colonizing people, lands, erasing peoples and erasing languages and traditions. It's like, from where does that expression come from? I know if you read some of those early writings, you see that their ships, hit the coast and looked out and thought, these people aren't taking care of the land, because there were no roads, there was no, it wasn't like plowed. They were in relationship to Wild Earth versus oppressing Wild Earth. And that seemed backwards to the people who were coming to these new lands. But that's the expression. Like, where's the core of it? It's the mind. So the mind in their own lives for hundreds of years in Europe took them from the earth. There was something that happened, some moment. And I'm always like amazed. I always try to meditate. Like, what was the moment that someone had this idea that you two
I do
that
too.
were separate?
I've traced it
right?
back to the Romans and something about the Roman Empire.
Tell me, what's your idea?
Oh, okay. I don't have. Okay, when I go really back, it comes to the moment. This is, by the way, everybody, this is totally just my own making this up from my observations. No historical accuracy or evidence. Okay, just a disclaimer. But when we went from Stone Age to being able to smelt metal, and metal gave us these tools that were powerful, and now we could take and have more, and we could hurt more, and metal became, bronze became this highly valuable item, that now there was some sort of value that had been taken from the earth, and people like it just, I think something about smelting metal was the beginning, but then the real, I'm not a scholar on ancient history, so I don't know what was happening in like Sumeria and all that. So, I think humans have been weird to each other forever. I don't have some like rosy, I like even my ancestors who were indigenous to European lands were horrible and would slaughter without any sort of remorse, and they were in intimate connection with the land. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to be this like peaceful being, but it was up until most of Europe and like Eurasia were living in tribal, like the Celtic people essentially were living in tribal communities, villages, families. And it was when the Romans first came. Christianity wasn't even around. The Romans were still pagan. And the Romans were on this crusade for more. It was just this crusade for more. And what made them different, I can't believe we're going at this whole tangent. What made them different is the Romans had this city-state structure. And they had this whole system that was so completely different from the paradigm of the tribes, and everything, their values, what they took honor in, and the way they fought, the way that they got honor in fighting and winning or losing, and the way that they viewed authority, the way that they viewed sovereignty. It was all completely different. And the way that the city-state of the Romans was structured allowed them to organize into this massive war machine of conquering and colonizing. And before, there in like the Celtic people, there would be raids, there would be violence, there would be like, okay, they would have like their spring raiding. They would have, like this was like a thing and everyone knew about it. And they would try to like negotiate with their neighbors before raiding season came so they could be chill. But no, they would still raid, but it was different. It wasn't like, I'm going to go colonize and take them over and just spread out and massively own everything I possibly can. And I think like there's something there. It's like from the bronze to the Romans, that's where I've gotten so far. I'm open to all insights.
Well,
everybody.
When you say that, it's like I'm thinking, if I'm in front of one of those people, let's say, if I'm just envisioning that. And again, we think of like when we see these things, like when I say expressions, what I really mean are behaviors, right? But I like to say expressions because behavior sounds like identity sometimes. We think someone's stuck. So like if I meet someone who's homophobic, that looks like an identity. To me, it's an expression, which means it can actually be healed if they're open to it. And so when you're talking about these expressions of colonization, again, expression lets us, invites the understanding that it's coming from somewhere. It's not it. So them colonizing and slaughtering a village. That's not them. That's an expression of something deeper. So what is it? Well, to me, it comes down to scarcity, which is an expression of low capacity. Because when there's low capacity, excuse me, we feel very insecure. Viscerally, physiologically, there's an insecurity because we can't handle a lot of charge. So somewhere between metal and even the way metal was created and how it looked different from Earth, when you would build, let's say, swords out of it and shields, you couldn't really see that in Earth the way you could see, let's say, like a hut or beautiful cloth clothing. There was something slightly separate there. And when we're thinking about this attunement that I was talking about, it's like, what are we attuning to? If we're attuning to armor and shields, we're also attuning to a threat response of we're insecure. And so from like a physical insecurity, these expressions come out. I think of Chris Columbus, like coming to the land, my ancestors in Puerto Rico, coming up to the coast and thinking, we need this. How can we get this? I'm scared. I have to, no matter what. I have to prove myself. This sense of low capacity and insecurity, which is a traumatic state. And then there's a trauma expression, just like when we see a police officer killing someone because they're Black. It's the same expression coming from the same place. And it's a psyche, it's a mindset. So when you're saying like our mind's taking us from nature, and then we're going on this, intuitive history lesson, it's it's important because I say it's important because it's humbling to know we're all capable of it. No one is immune to having a concept that they're threatened, that they need more, that someone deserves less. No one's immune to that thought. We all have them on some level. Some of us don't act on it. Some of us do. And in that shift is where we have these huge divides in social constructs and hate crimes and violence and genocide and actual physical issues in the world. And I say that so people don't think I'm saying, like racism is a mindset. It is, but it becomes a physical like monster as well. So it is real. It does exist, but it comes from the mind first and expresses itself. So to go back to you saying, how do we get in relationship with things when the mind's taking us out of it? That's where this decolonizing the mind comes in and decolonizing the body. It has to be individual. It can't be a policy. I love that we could create peaceful policies, but who's going to follow them? Individual bodies. So we have to go into the body of the individual willingly with their consent, right? Or they're going to have a threat response. That's why,
right? Not manipulating power over control.
No, you can't. You can't do it. So you have to invite the racist. You have to invite the toxic capitalist. You have to invite whatever it is that you see as the imbalance into the conversation. So they can start to notice, first of all, before I even notice my actions to other people, how do I relate to my body? How does my mind relate to my surroundings? Am I constantly talking bad about myself? Am I constantly looking around thinking I wish I had more? Do I notice the tree that waves and bends in the breeze when I walk by it? Or am I thinking about something else? Living from that disconnection means we ignorantly hurt people because we're not connected. It's that simple. So when you start decolonizing your own mind, just by asking the question, where do I oppress my own body? Then it reverberates out to everyone around you. And I find that for me, that's the way that I show up in this world to help destabilize and deconstruct these really brutal constructs that hurt people, is asking the people who are part of these constructs to go inward first versus telling them they're wrong and stop. It just doesn't work. Are they wrong? Should they stop? Yeah. Is it going to happen? Probably not. And this is where we get into the fawning. Because when we see like performative allyship, regardless of what it's for, it's a fawn response for fear of being canceled. And when you're fawning, you're also freezing and dissociating. So you can't even take in the feedback you're getting from your community. You're just doing it to calm things down because, again, you lack capacity. So we're talking about so many different subjects because it's multi-level, it's multidimensional, but it really comes back to the individual's capacity and their relationship to their body and land as relative. And from there, all these things naturally deconstruct. And that's what I'm hoping to get across in the work I'm doing with you two in your communities, and with the work that I'm doing for my community, with the album release that I'm creating, how to get them into that state that I found through doing this work and decolonizing it myself.
So much is coming up right now.
I want to hear.
So something that was coming up to me, and like I have to make the connections in my mind to process, right? Like so much is being spoken about. And what's coming up is the relationship between the Romans and Egypt, because both areas were very much like colonizing their peoples. And, you know, I was thinking of like, where does that power like overcome from? And I think it is, like you said, Luis, scarcity. And during that time, it was very much like, especially in Egypt, not knowing when their next mega crop was going to be and how they're going to feed. I would argue that they were more concerned with feeding the gods than their actual people, because they had these abundant gardens while people were hungry. But it was that, and even like, you know, the colonization of the Americas was like, how do we expand and conquer and take over so that our population continues to thrive and you know, flourish? And then it's like, oh, there are other people. Other humans exist. Okay, let's assimilate, because it's hard to understand anything outside of our experience when we are not really sure how to relate. I don't know where I'm going with this, but in relationship to the land, I think it's important, and I would love to see more people have an animistic perspective when it comes to relating with the land around us, because I think that's where I truly started to shift my understanding of a lot of like attunement and awareness and how I move through the earth and with other people. And I took this animistic psychology course with Dr. Daniel Foer, and what I thought was really interesting was when he says to not assume Earth is one, a mother, but two, is hurting, and to go into the land and really ask without our assumptions of how that land is doing on an ecological level. And when you start to sit with areas of land, you begin to attune and you can start to listen. You'll notice, you know, certain types of animals in that same area all the time and the conditions around it. And like, you can feel if that area is actually hurting before assuming that it is. And when we assume that the earth is hurting, we're asserting our judgment and our power over and not having power with. And that was profound. And I think it's like, you know, just tying it back to how I'm super more like interested in right now being action oriented. Like, I'm so tired of talking about everything. Like, you know, we are making progress and progress is still needed. And, you know, we should always, as a humanity, as, you know, a collective on earth, like be pushing to be the best that we can possibly be, in my opinion. And we have to like, it's a muscle. That relating is a muscle that has to be, you know, established. And when we can establish that with the earth, we can establish it with one another and see each other as an extension of nature. And I think that is just like what really clicks in how we're all interconnected, because we are all one, but we all experience things differently. And we have to understand, like, you know, I don't know if I necessarily agree with like, we have to appreciate that our experiences are different and come to an understanding of our commonalities so that we can move forward.
You're saying so many important things. When you're talking about when you're talking about even what you just said about we have to notice our differences and commonalities to be able to tolerate, and I'm doing quotes, like tolerate difference, you have to have capacity. Because when you were talking about the colonization of the Americas, right, Turtle Island, and them coming here, and like you said, we need this. These people are in our way. We need to kill or assimilate. Essentially, that's what happened. It's like if you're in relation to yourself, you can't do that. You don't have it in you. It would make you so sick to inflict harm. If you're disconnected from your body, dissociated in a flight or fight response, you could possibly do that because you're not in a feeling receptive place. And when I look at, if I, pretend I'm hovering over the earth, I'm watching this go down, all these years ago, I'm seeing a flight response from Europe, a large amount of people flighting from the violence and injustice from their kings and their oppressors and their rulers, just like Natalie was saying, their own people killing each other, same tribe, same skin color, flighting to the Americas for safety, and then projecting all their trauma onto the people of that land instead of being able to be in relation. But you can't be in relation if you're, one, stuck in trauma, and two, colonizing yourself, right? So it's like I use this history to orient me to the present, to say, okay, where am I colonizing myself? And when someone triggers me, to go back to what you said earlier, that person's actually reminding me of a part of myself I hate, a part of myself I have no capacity for, a part of myself that feels like a threat. And I see that in them. So the really radical work, like when you're saying I want action, the really radical action is to create the capacity to go into spaces with people who oppose us and who we oppose, and be able to actually find safety in that opposition. And the thing I oppose in them, where is that in me? And then from there, there's this incredible connectivity where you don't agree, but you understand because it's in you. So when I run into a homophobe or a sexist, I'm like, I hated my bisexuality growing up. I hated my breasts. That was me being a sexist. That was me being homophobic. I understand why that person would do that too. I'm not going to tolerate it, but I understand it. And so I'm not going to be in a threat response with that person because there's capacity. And capacity transmutes, like going back to vibration and charge, capacity literally transmutes charge of threat into sensations of peace and pleasure. So someone's violence can enter my body and it's not going to get stuck, and I'm not going to propel it onto somebody else unless I go constricted.
Yes. Like that is where we can begin to, evolve our way of thinking. And I don't know how else to like bring in this conversation without relating to my experiences, but I just went through that. We just had this huge, we're still in it. I don't even know. I call it the racial revolution because I'm mixed race. For a long time, I identified as a Black woman. And for the first time, like speaking this aloud and, because of trauma reasons, I just was silent. I didn't say anything. And then coming to, speaking it and then being told, you're not allowed to take up space as a Black woman, and me being like, what? What do you mean? Like, mom, dad, like, what? Help. But then like, having to process that. So I just threw myself into the spaces that made me feel uncomfortable with my identity, because there was no way for me to understand without doing that. So I started following conversations, and, Clubhouse was I'm going to name that as paramount in the shift of where I got to hear Black women speak on, mixed race with Black and so many things, 13 different things for one. But I was able to then understand that my understanding of my identity, and this is just my story, yours is absolutely okay, but my understanding of who I was came from white supremacy, because And it came from me like asking my dad questions like, okay, how can I say that I'm a Black woman if I'm mixed? Oh, Jim Crow, one drop rule. Oh, well, that's racist as hell, like.
Tell us what one drop rule is for people who don't know, Shauna.
Right. So in America, and also my experience is based in America. This isn't global, the one drop rule in America says that if you have one drop of Blackness, you are Black. And back in the day, because of segregation, if you were mixed race, you were considered a mulatto. And all of the paperwork, if you had one drop of Black, you were Black on your paperwork. And that's your identity. That would define what school you went to, what job you got. There's a whole thing on passing. You know, people for a long time would say that I pass as white. And I'm like, now I challenge that. And I say, no, I'm white assuming because you're assuming that I'm white. I don't call myself a white person. That's one drop rule. It's from Jim Crow. Google that and you'll learn a lot. But anyways, from throwing myself into those uncomfortable conversations and spaces that I didn't feel, really welcomed in, I was able to understand why calling myself a Black woman was harmful and making some people feel like they were being erased, because my experience is not the same. I do present white, and I realize now, like, and this is something I have just reconciled to within like the past few weeks, is that I'm mixed race Black woman, and I still hold on to that Black woman because I think it's a part of my culture. It's the space I was raised in. It's a part of who I am. I just present differently. But I would not have been able to evolve my understanding of my identity without following those triggers and like allowing myself to feel what comes up and trace those stories back far enough to understand.
I think it's so beautiful because you're giving us a real experience, a personal, intimate experience of how opposition was your medicine. Because when we come against something, even the word against, when we come up to something that's opposite and it does something to us, so someone says to you, like, you're not allowed to say that, and trigger something, it's like the something it triggers is what you need to listen to. And if we don't have an inquiry practice or any kind of practice of awareness of, okay, the trigger is for me, it's something to actually hear and follow, like you said, versus using it to react or believing I'm threatened subconsciously because a trigger feels like threat. We want to use those triggers. And I completely, I relate to that so much, that story, in so many ways. And I think, I guess what I love about that again is noticing in the opposition is a place to notice a part of myself that maybe I oppose, or a part of myself that opposes another. And so you get to be in this beautiful, humble awareness now of, in my innocence, people were harmed. And now I get to learn why and how I can still position myself authentically in a way that feels really good to me, that isn't harming someone either. Because even at the end of the day, you're not responsible for someone's discomfort. But if you want to have a really open heart and do good work, you use the discomfort, you inquire, you ask questions, you learn about the discomfort, and then you learn more about yourself. And that's exactly what you did. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you. And you just kind of touched on it, which is that process of like, okay, you feel triggered. Now what? Because I'll tell you, it was a very dramatic experience for me when somebody first told me that I wasn't allowed to claim the Blackness of myself. And I was angry as hell. I was so mad. I did not have the capacity at that point for any like conversation in regards to racial identity. But in that anger, I was hungry for information of like, why am I feeling this? I took it all the way back through history and to forward into time. And, I think here's an important plug for community is I got to talk to Natalie about it. I got to bring my feelings to my community to my family, to have these spaces to express my hurt. And, while some people are like, oh, you have every right to claim this space, and some people are like, no, you don't. Like, what is that process? Like, for people going through, it doesn't have to be related to identity, but, whatever it is people are processing from that feeling of triggered. Maybe you can walk us through that.
Yeah, it's so tricky at first because so earlier when we were talking about triggers, which I felt like was 8 hours ago, it was this is a good time work conversation. When we were talking about triggers, remember I said that a trigger is both activation, but activation with meaning attached. That's the key there. Is like you said something really well. You said I didn't have the capacity. I got really angry, yet something in you questioned the anger, right? So even if there's a little bit of you to question it, that is gorgeous versus not questioning it and just like identifying with it and moving with it. Yes, I'm allowed to be angry. So it's a good example, first of all, because this isn't about not being a human without emotions. Or not being a human without emotions. It's really about kind of get curious about why this is bringing up so many emotions. When we get curious, we learn that every trigger we have has a meaning attached to it. And when we actually get still and with a facilitator or alone, we find the actual meaning that came up from the triggered event. That's the medicine. That's the work. So what I mean by that is, could I ask you, are you aware right now? Maybe you don't have the intellectual awareness. I'm not sure. Maybe it's somatic for you. Do you know what the meaning was from someone saying you can't take up the space? The word, the concept, what did that mean to you that triggered you?
The meaning that I took from that was I was being told that there was no place for me.
Yes. Perfect. So notice the difference, right? So the meaning is never the reality. The meaning is what the unconscious attaches to the reality based on past traumatic experiences. So even right now, if I ask you, you don't have to tell us what they are, but if I say to you, trace the lineage of there's no place for me, and just notice in your mind and your body how many examples come up of I don't belong, there's no place for me, they don't want me, all those things attached to it. Can you feel or see those?
Absolutely. Yes, I had to do this in this process too. It came from being a child and growing up in Black spaces and feeling othered and having, relatives who didn't like me because I was white presenting and I wasn't in the context of how I was raised. Proximity to whiteness was not celebrated. So I felt othered growing up. And so I'm being told by my family that I'm Black. So then I'm Black. And so then that's where I traced it to.
Perfect. That's perfect. And the reason why that's perfect is because, and for everyone listening, there's a really important distinction here. The trigger is the thing, the external event, the person, the experience, the thought even. The triggered is what it reminds the body of. So when that person or that community said that to you, you can't take the space, it triggered this history of feeling othered, of being rejected, abandonment, judgment, all those things. And every time we have one of those experiences, and this is particularly true as children, the charge that comes with that threatening experience, because it's a relational threat when you're young, when someone related to you is othering you, you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to be abandoned. And it hits your primitive survival response. If you're a child abandoned, you're going to die, primitively speaking. So it's in the bones still that if my parents or guardians or elders are denying me, I don't have a place, I won't survive. And that triggers the trauma response. Now, in that charge as a child, we don't have the capacity to work with our charge. So our bodies package it up and put it somewhere. And if you have like 40,000 experiences like that, or 400 or 10 or 1, it's somewhere in there. It's like a landmine, if you will. And then when you walk into that space and you're speaking as a quote Black woman, and someone's saying you can't use that title here, bam, it opens those up. And what happens is when it opens those up, those old experiences that never got to be sat with get projected onto the new experiences. And we call this like trauma stacking. All these things are overcoupled and built in this one moment. And that's why we lack the capacity, because we're feeling a lifetime of unprocessed, unconscious experiences being awakened in one current experience. So it's the process of slowly, like you did, taking apart each experience that was awakened from that. And then it's called uncoupling, when you've uncoupled these past events from the present one, you've also removed the threat associated with the present one. So you have physical capacity, and then you can listen. You can learn, you can share, you can question, you can re-examine, and you actually have the capacity for ignorance. Because we're all ignorant. No one is safe from ignorance. So you're going to make a mistake somewhere in the world. And in this world right now, it's very dicey. It feels like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to hurt someone or get canceled. You're going to do it. So if we have the capacity to do it, it means that our mistakes, as you've learned, are our medicine. It's just being able to trace the meaning attached to the trigger and then uncouple it from the present so we can actually be present and not threatened.
That's so beautiful. Thanks for taking me through that. And I'll say, being in nature and taking these moments of anger and grief and everything, like I took it to the ocean. That's where I was able to ground.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, because that let us go into that with you. It's really beautiful.
So much good stuff coming up. Thanks for sharing that, Shauna. And yeah. So Luis, we are going to do a workshop. You're going to come back. You're going to be our second repeat workshop teacher, I think. Yes. So we're very excited to have you back. And do you want to share just a little bit with folks about what you're planning on leading them through?
Yes, we're going to be working with essentially our relationship to our bodies, how we oppress our bodies, what we think about them, how our minds colonize our bodies and our people and our environments around us, with that distinguishing, clarifying question: am I in dominance over this, trying to control it, or am I in relationship to this? And to repeat something that Shauna said, based on Dr. Daniel Foer, listening is a decolonizing act, because you are listening for identity. You are listening for the being showing itself to you. You're not telling it what it is. And that's what we're going to be doing in this workshop: how to listen to the sensations of the body and follow them and move with them, versus saying what they are, trying to figure out exactly where they're from. That happens sometimes, right? Like we learn where they're from, like we were just talking about, but we don't always need to. We can just, like you were saying earlier, we can just, like with the guitar example that I had, we can just feel and let it move and watch and be really curious. And that's how we start decolonizing our body. So I'm going to take everybody through the process of doing that. And I'm going to bring in some things about nutrition, so many different ways we can actively, ritualistically decolonize ourselves from our upbringings and our generational lineages based on where we're from.
Beautiful. Exciting. And folks, you can sign up for that or join the collective and get access to it, and come join the fun. And and tell us about what you offer. You've got a new album. You've got your album coming out, and you offer so much. What do you got, and where can people find it all?
Oh yeah, the album is releasing on the fall equinox, so September 22nd, that is, this year, I believe. So the album comes out then, and the pre-order is on the summer solstice. I didn't even try this; it just happened that way. But with the album, anyone that pre-orders it in May and June, if they pre-order it, there's a limited ritual package I'm doing, which takes place in October. And everyone will get a signed vinyl. It's coming out on record with a plant of mine that I'm sending and a bundle of mugwort from our property. And it's going to be this amazing ritual that I'm going to curate through the months leading up to October, which invite us into these questions of our lineage traumas, our lineage wisdom, our relationship to food and land and self. And so then when we're all together in October, it's going to be a virtual Zoom healing. Well, I don't want to say healing because that's like an expectation, but a virtual Zoom ritual where we're going to show up and we're all going to share what we've learned from those months, our lineage, our story, what we're releasing, what we're invoking, and do a big ritual together that's somatically led. And all the 25% of the proceeds are going to the Center of Native Peoples and the environment. So I'm excited about that too. So yeah, that's what the record, if you pre-order the ritual package, is what you get for it, and that's what it does in the world.
And where can people do that?
Oh, they can do that on my website, luismojica.com.
Okay. And of course, as always, links are in the show notes, folks. Yes. And you offer, sessions, group sessions for people to come experience somatic experiencing and healing, and all that's on your website, right? Anything else you want to say
All
about
that? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, all that's on my website. Every month I do a sliding scale virtual group somatic session where everyone can come in. I just teach the basic foundations and principles. We all check in. Then we do the work together as a group. And every 3 or 4 months, I do a 6-week online course. The next one is July 4th. But registration is June 6th for that one. And that's an amazing way to dive really deep and really get this work in your body.
Super rad. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and hanging out. It was, as always, a real pleasure.
I love being with you too. And I love reading your work and just taking in your wisdom. So it's always feels so good to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I love talking to you. I feel like we can always go a million different directions at any one time.
That's right. That's right. My favorite way to talk. Yeah. Thank you both.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.